Hey there, everybody. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to a very special edition of the show. And it's pretty cool for me because we've gotten the co-captain's chair today for the first time on SOT, our fairly new writer, the power from down under, Mr. Ben Dudai. What's going on, Ben?
Yeah, everything's great, Pete. It's great to be here and join you to talk a bit of tech and prog death.
That's right. That's right. We got a primer episode for all of you. So I am a big fan of this style of music. For me, I like death metal anyway, but folks know I love prog and prog metal. So when you kind of combine them in a weird sort of way, some interesting things happen. And we've had a large selection of bands over the years who have done this kind of intricate, technical, progressive death metal style. Some better than others. Some are legends in the genre. Others are still kind of up and coming. And Ben is a big fan as well. And so he and I are going to kind of take you through a little bit of history of how this all started. But more notably, we're going to look at some of the cool bands that you should be kind of keeping an eye out for today. And again, I want to thank Ben for coming on here. He's in Australia. I'm in New York. So there's many hours in between us. So we had to kind of really coordinate.
Actually, I'm Australian, but I'm actually living in Israel. So you're killing two international birds with this stone. So.
There you go. Okay. All right. So I didn't know you were in Israel. Okay. I thought you were in Australia. Okay. But so I'm very thankful he can come on the show today. We could figure our schedules out. And Ben has been very busily adding lots of great content to our webzine, seatranquility.org. Ben, in addition, we brought about 5 new writers on board over the last year or so, and Ben has been one of them. So he's been contributing some great content. So please go over to www.seatranquility.org to check out Ben's reviews and everybody else on the staff. So back to business. So, all right. So Ben, so kind of lead us into this whole technical progressive death metal thing. Where did this kind of all start?
Well, I mean, obviously, the death metal element has the same roots as all your sort of classic death metal bands. But I think that with the technical side of things, from the very beginning, I think they were drawing on some of the technicality that was going on in the thrash world, with bands like, Watchtower and Hellstar and Toxic and these kind of bands would go on to influence bands like Death. A lot of the bands that were coming out of Florida, like Death was Death, Cynic, Atheist. These sort of bands, I think, are what a lot of the guys in the tech world think of as kind of the beginning of technical death metal. I think you had, with Death, obviously they were doing the creation of death metal, but then you've got, with their album Human, which I've got there on their iPad, sorry if that looks a bit funny, is where you started to see the technicality ramp up. And especially, I would say, from the drumming point of view, from Sean Reinhardt, really sort of set the blueprint of technical drumming for that style of music. And then, of course, you have like Atheist with their album Unquestionable Presence. They had a piece of, what was it? Peace in Time? Piece of Time? Yeah. Which was sort of more straight ahead, I would say. But on Unquestionable Presence is where, Kelly Schaefer started to introduce more complicated riffing and sort of took the songs in directions that were pretty unexpected.
Big jazz element coming in too, because I know they were big fans of jazz fusion. So that was even a slightly different avenue than what Death were doing. It's just amazing how you had both these two bands from a similar place who very quickly started to do really complicated music, but they were approaching it from different avenues, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. And but that's the thing that would eventually all sort of end up in the tech and prog death stuff. We're getting tongue-tied here. Would be sort of those elements of, neoclassical, which sort of got introduced with Necrophagist, which would come later.
Yep.
And the jazzy side of things, which is very sort of prominent throughout the prog death stuff. Of course, when Necrophagist hit the scene with the head onset of putrefaction, and then the landmark Epitaph,
Yeah.
This is really where I think you see the blueprint of what a lot of tech bands would sort of emulate and draw inspiration from. You know, they had the sort of Baroque style neoclassical riffing, but at incredible, you know, speeds and technical levels. But with that sort of coupled with the Sean Reinhardt, you know, blueprint of that intense drumming, the extreme drumming and doing it in a way that was extremely seamless, you know, and extremely tight. And, you know, you can really hear the precision, you know, it's not cavernous in any way, like, you know, like a lot of death metal is, you know, where it sometimes just feels like a big pummel, you know, but they really sort of hone this sound of you know, getting the definition in. You know, you hear every single note, but it's, you know, it's a blistering speeds and technicality.
Yeah, there's a sophistication there, right, that we hadn't heard in this style of music before. Where and let's be frank, there is still plenty of big brutal moments in a lot of the albums and bands that we're going to be talking about here, but
absolutely,
there's that level of intricacy and complexity and sophistication or artfulness was something new. And all of a sudden, you know, you're listening to a band like, you know, like the bands you've already mentioned, or even like some Morbid Angel stuff, right? As brutal as some of that music is and was, all of a sudden you're hearing these nuances that like bring it far above that normal, just brutal and punishing music, which death metal in its very infancy was known as. And people started, you know, musicians and people who are into, you know, 70s prog rock and jazz fusion, all of a sudden are interested in this type of music, even though it is really extreme. But there is just this element about it that now all of a sudden kind of dials it up a notch and makes it much more musical and, you know, melodic. Melodic is okay, right? It's okay to have melody in music.
Absolutely. Look, you know, I'm a huge fan of melodic music, and I prefer that kind of at that end of the spectrum when it comes to death metal. But it's funny, you know, the way that I came back to listening to death metal was through, you know, being a big jazz fusion and prog fan for many years. That was the majority of what I was listening to through most of my 20s and 30s. And I just sort of ran out of, well, things to listen to, and was looking for that complexity, that challenging, you know, and I stumbled across technical death metal and was pleasantly surprised by what I found. Of course, you know, one of the cool things about Necrophagist was that it spawned a couple of guys as well who would go on to also make a big mark on the genre. Of course, it was spearheaded by Mohammed. I never know how to pronounce his last name. Suimez,
something like that. I've never gotten it correct either.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry, Mohammed, if you're watching, but no disrespect intended. Australians are famous for butchering people's last names. So
hey, you don't know the half of it. I'm a New Yorker. That's what we do.
Right. Okay. So yeah. So those two guys that I mentioned that came from Necrophagist, you have Christian Moundsner on the guitar and Hans Grossman on the drums. And these two guys would, of course, go on to do many, many other things. And most famously, one of the bands that they would go on to would be Obscura, which I think probably a lot of people, you know, they're one of the more famous bands within the tech world. And they also incorporate a bit of the prog in there as well. And, you know, anybody who hasn't heard Christian Moundsner playing guitar really needs, you know, if you're a fan of shred, but classy shred and done, you know, with pristine precision, you know, and just pure expertise. I mean, this guy is one of the hottest guitarists in the world right now. He can do anything. He plays, you know, he's got multiple bands. You know, he's got Obscura. He's in Alkaloid. He's got his own band, which is like a power metal thing. Oh man, the name of it is escaping me at this moment. I'm getting the olds too.
You got it. We all have the olds, man. Yeah, I'll find it for
Yeah.
you. Keep talking. I'll find it for you.
But anyway, so, you know, any guitar fans out there who want to be dazzled and impressed, I would highly recommend you go check out any of his work. He's also got solo albums.
Eternity's End. Eternity's
End. Yeah, Eternity's End is a really great. If you're a fan of like power metal, but you like, for me, power metal sometimes is a bit cheesy, a bit. I like some of it, but you know, these guys really amp up the technicality element of it. So it's got that extra cool factor, in my opinion. And the songs are great. The last album was kick-ass, the one that they released last year. So, and, you know, Hans Grossman as well, he's been involved in a whole swag of things. He's also, you know, from Obscura, he was in Alkaloid. He's got his own solo albums. He's done a million guest spots, and so is Christian. So these are two guys who are really important to that genre, that subgenre.
Yeah, and I would highly, you know, I've talked about Obscura quite a bit on the channel over the years, and I am a big fan of what they do. And I think you know, we have a lot of folks who watch Sea of Tranquility who, you know, are not really into the extreme end of things, and they get, you know, the whole idea of the extreme vocals, growls and screams and rasp and all that kind of stuff is hard for some people to digest. And
yeah, I
always preface when I talk about Obscura and bands like that, it's like, if you like, you know, just jaw-dropping musicality, and you prefaced his guitar skills perfectly. I think he's got, like, if you love Steve Vai, Joe Satriani, combine the two, and that's kind of what you get with him. He's so melodic, he's so tasty, and just the dexterity is just off the charts. So here you have this really sophisticated guitar playing housed inside these kind of spacey, technical death metal tracks, right? And it really works. I think they take Obscura, and again, their name comes from a title of a album, which is another great technical death metal band from Canada.
Yeah, and it's completely different. Completely different angle. Yeah,
exactly.
It's kind of like if Voivod was a death metal band or something, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, to me, like, Gorguts is kind of like take Voivod, Meshuggah, and in a weird way, probably Gojira, although they obviously came out way before them. It's kind of like this very rhythmic, lots of polyrhythms, heavy type of thing, but equally enjoyable, I think. But Obscura is just a brilliant band, and
yeah, they really are.
They kind of you know, take what Chuck and Death were doing back in the day, and the guys in Cynic were doing, and they've kind of brought it into like the modern era, and they've made it even more melodic and even more shreddy, right? So, because I mean, just some of the guitar work is jaw dropping.
Oh, it's insane. It's insane. And I would just mention about them, like, it was really this album, Cosmogenesis, which sort of put them on the map. Personally, this is my favorite here, Deluvian. Which is actually not the album that actually doesn't have Christian Moundsner or Hans Grossman on it. It had the sort of alternative lineup, and they are just as jaw-droppingly great as well. And, you know, it's not just the guitars. Like some of these tech death bands, it can get a little tiring because they all sort of, it's just all about the wheelie diddlies, you know, wheelie diddly, wheelie diddly, wheelie. And you just sort of get a bit lost in that. But these guys,
the bass work is just killer.
Yeah, I mean, they had the guy from Pestilence, Jeroen Thesseling, I think his name. He was on those first couple, and he's come back to the band now for this latest album, A Valediction. But they had Linus Klausenitzer in there as well, who's a fantastic bass player as well. And yeah, those arrangements, they're just so rich and complex. And, you know, about the growling thing that you mentioned, I totally get that, because I was that guy. I mean, like I said, I was a fusion jazz guy, a old school prog guy. And for me, like, I always loved heavy riffs. I always loved the sound of the band, the metal bands, but I couldn't get past the growling, you know. But like, you know, like you said, if you just sort of focus on the band for a while and you just sort of stick with it for a while, you start to, it's like you go through phases. At first you sort of, yeah, it's not bad, I can just sort of zone it out. But then eventually you get used to it and you actually start to expect it, and you even want to hear it after a while. It's like acquiring the taste, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I forget the episode that we did real recently here on the channel where we kind of talked about this. And
with Jamie Laszlo, I think, right?
Yes, exactly. That was the chemist show.
The charts.
Yeah, the chemist show. So, you know, right. For me,
they're great bands.
It took a band like Opeth and Amorphous and Borknagar. Those were kind of the three bands that, but I was listening to Death way back when. So I got my kind of start in this way back when it all began. But, you know, for me, I went through a good chunk of the 90s not listening to a lot of metal. I was listening to lots of jazz and jazz fusion and prog. That's basically what I went from being a metalhead and a hard rock guy all throughout the late 70s and the 80s. And then, you know, when grunge and alternative came out, I got kind of disenchanted with popular music and I went into these other avenues. So it wasn't until like late in the 90s and into the early 2000s that I started to discover extreme metal. And right. At first I was kind of like, well, yeah, I used to like Death, but, you know, I tried listening to Cannibal Corpse and I tried listening to, you know, a bunch of other bands. And I was like, oh, the vocals do just too much. So someone said to me, it's like, well, why don't you try a band that does both vocal styles, like Opeth, who were just starting to get fairly big at the time, and Amorphous and Borknagar. I'm trying to think, there was Dark Tranquility right there, you know, a couple other bands that were using clean vocals with the growls. And I was completely taken by the musicality of it all. And I love the clean vocals. And after a little while, I was like, you know what? I don't mind the growls anymore because they're well done. I can kind of understand what they're saying, and they offset each other. You know, the way they go back and forth between the clean and the growling, I really like that. And then eventually I got used to straight growls, and I was like, I don't mind this anymore. You know, if done correctly. Granted, there are some bands where I don't like the pig grunt type of thing. That doesn't appeal to me. But I love a great death metal growl. I absolutely love it. It's done correctly, and it fits some of the music. So for those watching who still have that blockade up, I get it. But do some of the things that Ben and I are talking about, and slowly, you know, listen to some of these bands and really focus on the music first. And you just might grow a little fond of the way they sing as well.
Yeah, it's funny how you come to these things, because Opeth was pretty much the gateway for me as well. Except the funny part about it was that I actually got into Opeth really late, around the time that Heritage came out.
Oh, so they're already doing away with that stuff. Yeah.
Well, but here's the thing. I mean, I heard Heritage, and unlike most Opeth fans who sort of hated it, I was like, this is the best thing I've ever heard. And so it made me go back. And when I went back to, you know, Watershed first, I was like, oh, okay, so I have to put up with the growls, but the music is fantastic because it's not that dissimilar from what they were doing on Heritage by that stage.
Right.
So I was sort of putting up with it, and yeah, like you say, you get used to it. But anyway, I'd like to sort of introduce to you guys some of to your viewers, like some of the, I guess, modern standard bearers. I mean, obviously we can't cover everybody. There's countless amounts of bands in this genre. I mean, it's kind of mind-blowing, and there seems to be new bands popping up every day.
All the time, yeah. All the time.
Apart from like the two musical communities that I love the most and I spend the most time engaged with is yours, thanks Pete, and also on Facebook is a great Facebook group, Technical Progressive Brutal Death Metal Sharing, I think it's called. And it's really good. It's really vibrant. It's been growing. I mean, I joined it when there was a couple of hundred people, and now there's something like 30,000, 40,000 people in there. And so this is a great place to see what's really popular and what's really sort of happening in that scene right now. And I sort of put the word out to that group to see, I had my own ideas of what it would be, and I was pretty on it, but just to see what everybody would say are the, let's say the five current standard bearers of the genre. So, we already mentioned Obscura. Another one that they are due to bring out a new album, I think this year or maybe next year, but a band I highly recommend, especially if you want the technicality, but you don't want for it to be too oppressively heavy. It is all growls with occasional little bits of sort of singing growls, but the music is so groovy and fun, and that's this band here, Gorod. I highly recommend this album. It's that you've never heard guitar riffs like this. They're extremely technical, extremely difficult to play, but it's just all loaded with fun. I mean, it's, I don't know if they intend it to be so fun, but for me, whenever I listen to this album or any of their albums, because all their albums are fantastic, it always puts a smile on my face and gets the old booty shaking, So I highly recommend that one. If you're looking for something in the metal world that's also kind of fun. And I think that's actually something that's a little bit missing. I've been listening to a lot of bands like Hellstar. I've been really getting into them recently. And, one thing that like the 80s metal bands seem to have was, even when it was like, I mean, they're pretty heavy, but it also sort of has this element of fun in it that I think a lot of the bands these days are perhaps a little too serious, taking themselves a little too seriously and sort of missing out on the fun.
Yeah, I mean, as someone who was, lived throughout the whole 80s and was a big metal fan throughout the 80s and saw lots of concerts and everything, most of the 80s bands, regardless of what genre they were playing in, always seemed to be having a grand old time, and it came across in the music. And I think somewhere along the lines, maybe it started in the 90s, where everybody started to take things a little bit more seriously, or look at their music a little more seriously, or they're coming across a little more seriously. I don't know what happened, but yeah.
As Razor Fist, I don't know if you've seen his channel, but he calls it the no fun 90s. And look, I grew up, I was a teenager in the 90s, and I admit that I was pretty into all that grunge stuff, but I kind of lost. I'm done with all that a long time ago. But anyway, another band that it seems to be like pretty underground and unknown outside of the tech fans, and I can't understand why, because they're just as good as Obscura or some of the other bands that are more well known, and they're kind of like one of the real I don't know, touchstones of the current movement, I would say, and that's this band called Inferi. And this album from, I think, 2014. I don't know if you can see that. It's a cool album cover.
Yeah.
It's called The Path of Apotheosis. These guys are also, incredibly technical, incredibly heavy. If you're looking for singing, you're not going to find it here. But the thing I love about them is the melodic guitar lines are just so uplifting and powerful, and they have this real sense of drama in the music and sort of theatricality, I guess, but not in a sort of like Queen sort of grandiosity style way, but it's more in a sort of maybe in a sort of cinematic way or something like that. It's sort of they set this mood and this scene, and it just erupts, and it's epic and grand and powerful. And those lines, they have two guitarists in the band, both providing the lead shred, and that's Malcolm Pugh and Mike Lowe. And these guys are just a match made in heaven. That when they have very similar sounds, and they play very sort of, the lines really complement each other. And I highly recommend anybody who wants to hear tech death at its most ferocious, but melodically excellent as well. Check it out. I think you'd dig it, Pete.
Cool. Yeah,
and yeah, you definitely should check them out. And especially, hang on, let me just find the album cover for it. This was released last year, 2021. It's called Vile Genesis, another crazy album cover there. This was recorded by Dave Otero, who has, as you probably know, has done, a countless list of popular artists in metal. And this is a really good place to start because it has all the elements that they have. I love that first album. That's kind of like one of my all-time favorite metal albums. But this one is, I think, probably just as good, maybe even better, because the production is even better. The bass work is insane, and you can sort of hear it really well underneath, bubbling away and playing these crazy lines. And, everything is ramped right up, like it's full Spinal Tap all the way up to 11. So.
All the way up to 11.
So yeah, definitely check those guys out.
And for everybody watching, we will, in the comments below, we'll drop all the names to all these artists that we're talking about today, so folks can go and investigate further.
Yeah, it's a good idea. Of course, you've got these guys are not one of my personal favorites, although I do really respect what they do, but you can't really talk about tech death without mentioning them, and that's Archspire. And that album there, the Lucid Collective, from 2014, was kind of what put them on the map. That was their second album. And the following albums, which are Relentless Mutation and last year's Bleed the Future. Now, this is, I'll just show you, the album cover is really cool.
Yeah,
actually.
that's amazing. Yeah.
Look at that. So this is, like basically taking the technicality as far as it can possibly go in the terms of speed and accuracy and just insane levels of, how intense can we make this? Let's go all the way. I know a lot of people who are fans of tech really love that. Personally, it's sort of like, it's kind of got this novelty factor for me. I can like listen to like a couple of songs and then I just start to feel a bit burnt out because it's just like, and like, how do humans play it? I don't know. These guys are technically amazing players, full respect. The growler, the singer, I don't know what you call them, like the vocalist, let's say, his delivery is also as extreme and crazily technical. And I mean, he's kind of like, imagine like, those freestyle rappers who rap super fast, but he's doing it with growls. And I mean, and it's all, it's all articulated, kind of amazing. But there might be people out there who are looking for the extreme. And if that's what you want, I would definitely head to Archspire because you won't be disappointed. That's as extreme as it gets, really. And the last one that I'll mention of this sort of tech death world, although their last album really branched out into something else, but it's definitely worth mentioning because these guys are something else. And that is this band, First Fragment. I don't know if you've heard of those guys, but you have another one of these guitar wizards in the form of Phil Tugar. I think it's Tugars. They're from Quebec, so it's like French name, but he's kind of like another one of these guys like Christian Moundsner who can do this amazing neoclassical shred. These guys are kind of like the next generation of Malmsteen, but like unlike Malmsteen, who I love, but he's kind of got his lane. He stays in that lane. these guys can really do anything. I mean, he's Phil's doing albums where it's dark and cavernous and disgusting and there's no shred at all. And then he's got, he did the Eternity's End album with Christian Moundsner, where they're trading off solos like you've never heard. If you haven't heard Eternity's End, power metal fans, I'm telling you, you've got a treat waiting for you there. On First Fragments album, hey, where are we? It's in French, so excuse me again, but it's Gloire Éternelle or something. I don't know. I don't know how to say it. But that's also an amazing. Look at that beautiful album cover.
Yeah, there. That's pretty cool.
It's stunning. But this album came out last year, and it was one of the albums in my end of the year list. It's really kind of unique and remarkable. I mean, it's very long. That's probably my only gripe with it, because I get a little bit fatigued with it. But the level of skill shown by Phil on the guitars is mind blowing. But you've also got on the bass Dominic Forrest Lapointe, who is also well known in this scene as being kind of like I think of him as like the Jaco of death metal. I mean, he plays 6-string fretless bass. I mean, there's nobody as masterful in the genre as him. The guy should be a household name. He's an amazing player. He's played in Augury. He's played in Beyond Creation. And now he's with these guys. And he's doing all this insane stuff underneath the insane guitar playing. Even like sort of almost funky slap bass at times, well, actual slap bass. And, that might sound like that can't work in death metal, but it works. And, it's like neoclassical with slap bass and growled vocals, and just totally unique and cool. So go check that out.
Yeah, on paper you would think it shouldn't work, but it actually does. And I gotta say, I love those album covers. It reminds me of, like maybe 10 years ago. I remember the Unique Leader label were releasing all sorts of cool tech death albums with these amazing album covers, and that's what these all remind me of. It's just like that really started, I think, a whole wave of this sort of thing.
I mean, that's actually something that you see in the genre. Like there's a few artists that a lot of these bands go back to, and they're that group that I mentioned on Facebook, they're in the group as well. And it's a great community, because you can talk to everybody. There's no pretension there at all. Everybody's very friendly. You're constantly talking with the other bands and this and that, and they're sharing, they share members, they share ideas. Oh, and I also didn't mention that Malcolm Pugh from Inferi, the band I was talking about before, he actually started his own label called The Artisan Era, which is growing quite well. And they've been signing these sort of up and coming tech death bands as well. So that's pretty cool, like putting something back. But yeah, that's all the guys who are, I would say, in the more tech lane. Although that last example, perhaps not, because it is also sort of going into these other crazy directions.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of bands that are like that, where they touch on this whole tech death prog thing, but they're like, Rivers of Nile is like a perfect example of a band that were like, I think early on were full into this, but now they're moving into these like really, it's hard to explain. I mean, their last two albums, like there's elements of this, but they're doing psych and there's space rock on there. It's like all over the place. And there's a lot of those bands now that use tech death as a launch pad to now go into other things.
Absolutely. And, I was considering talking about them as well, but I thought, they're already pretty well known. Yeah. When they came out with their Where Only Owls Know My Name album, the last one, not this one, the one before.
Right.
They got a lot of press and rightly so. That's a great album. So I thought I'll talk about some of the bands that also deserve to be as well known as them, and in my opinion, some of them are my favorite bands. So that being said, I'm going to sort of now like introduce like a few bands which are like kind of like a crossover, or bands that have dipped their toe in the tech world and the prog world, or have evolved from tech into sort of prog, or, you know, combining a bit of, you know, a mix of all of it. So the first band I'd like to bring up is one of my favorite bands, and they released an album this year, which is, you know, I wrote a review for the webzine for this, and it's an absolute masterpiece. And that is the band Persephone, with the album Metanoia, as the album cover there. Now, these guys have been going at it for quite a while. This is a band from Andorra, which is a, you know, small country in the Pyrenees Mountains. And, you know, they've been going at it for quite a long time and producing some really great albums. I can't remember what year it was, but they had, probably starting from the album Shinken, which is a great album. Then they had Spiritual Migration. And this is the album that really got them some attention back in 2013.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a really good
Yeah,
one.
this is a great album. And this is probably their most tech deathy kind of album, even though it still has a lot of the progressive elements there. But, you know, this is where they really started to do those sort of techie riffs as well. Like, they kind of always were a prog death metal band. And even their earlier stuff I would compare to, like, for those who haven't heard it, imagine, say, like a Symphony X or Dream Theater, but as a death metal band, you know? And that's kind of where you're at with these guys. Like, the level of compositional prowess is really amazing. You know, all the songs are really interesting. Once the song kicks off, the song progresses and goes in these directions that you just, you know, and it's always a pleasure to go with them. You know, they take you on these journeys, which are always awesome. So this album got them a lot of attention with tech fans. That's where I came into them. The next album, which is one of my all-time favorite albums as well, and you can't really go wrong with this, is Asthma. The interesting thing with a lot of these albums is that, again, like, a lot of people have a problem with death metal because it's always about ripping corpses or slaughtering, you know, babies or whatever, some horrible thing. But, you know, this is all pretty, like, you know, it's all sort of happy and spiritual, which is kind of weird, you know, for that kind of, to be growling about that stuff, but they make it work. You know, normally, if you told me that and I hadn't heard the music, I would think that sounds pretty cringe. But, you know, like imagine like a new age self-help book in death metal, you know, but it's actually pretty good. It's actually very good. So if you haven't heard them, go check out those 3 albums and the latest one that's just dropped, Metanoia. I'll show it again. This is a masterpiece. It's just, you've also got a guest appearance on the first track from Einar Solberg, I think his name is, the singer from Leprous, does a guest appearance there. And I think there's a few other guest appearances on that album, but it's transcendent stuff. There's plenty of the sort of techie riffs in there, but there's also plenty of that real cinematic scope to everything as well, which, you know, some bands, when they do it, it can be a little cheesy, but these guys nail it. So have you heard these guys?
There are times when I listen to Persephone, I'm reminded in a weird way, and they don't really sound like them, a little bit like Orphan Land, because they have that big kind of, there's all these things going on and happening, and it comes.
Sure.
You mentioned the cinematic aspect, which I think is what kind of reminds me of them a little bit. But again, they don't sound anything like them at all.
Yeah. Actually, I think that, like, I mean, I like Orphan Land, especially like the last album that they did a few years ago. It was a pretty good prog metal album. But I think that they do sometimes get a bit cheesy, you know, a little
cringy. Yep.
Yeah. So anyway, I shouldn't say that too loud because, you know, they're sort of Israel's best export. Might get lynched.
They have a lot of fans. I know they're a great band. They're great. But they're
No,
not. They're not for everybody. I mean, they're for me. They're not an everyday listen for me. I have to
No.
really be in the mood to listen to Orphan Land, and a lot of what they do is brilliant. But that's some challenging stuff to digest at times.
Yeah, I actually found it really sucked me in. That last album really sucked me in for a couple of weeks, and then I just fell right off, and I haven't gone back to it. So I don't know why that is, but it's funny how that happens sometimes. And then you've got other albums that, like, when you first hear them, it doesn't click, and you have to, like, Inferi was like that for me. I heard them. I was getting into Obscura and all these other tech bands, and Inferi kept getting recommended to me, and I was like, nah, don't really get it. Now it's one of my favorite bands. Another band that is definitely worth checking out, and they're kind of a super group, and that's Alkaloid. Now this album right here, what's it called again? Liquid Anatomy. This is a fantastic album. This is, again, you've got all the technicality, but you've got these amazing progressive arrangements of everything. You've got Christian Moundsner, you've got Hannes Grossman, you've got Maureen from Dark Fortress on the vocals, and he does a great job at doing the growls and doing this clean singing as well. Oh, I didn't mention that. Fans of clean singing and not so much the growls, I think Persephone is a good band. Another good gateway band for you, and Alkaloid possibly as well, because it's seamless the way they mix the clean singing and the growls, and it's sort of, the growls are used for effect. You know, they kind of, there's moments where the music ramps up in intensity and you need that growl, but then when you want the melodic edge to take off, the singing takes you there. It works really well. So you got Linus Klasnitzer as well in there playing the bass, playing these awesome bass lines. Christian Moundsner, you got Danny Tunker also on the guitar, and he's well known from Aborted. What else was he in? Oh yeah, Spawn of Possession. Spawn of Possession is
I love Spawn of Possession.
Yeah, I don't think he actually did any of their albums, but Christian Moundsner, that's another album he did, was Incurso, which is an amazing album. Like one of the, you know that album, Incurso?
Yeah.
I'll just show the folks at home. If you want like a great crazy tech death album, that's the one right there. Yeah. Another great album cover too.
Oh yeah.
Look at that.
Yeah.
And I think when Christian Moundsner, because he did all the soloing on this album, and it's mind-blowing. I mean, some of the coolest like dive bombs and shred and all of that stuff. So Danny took over from Christian when he left the band to do all the touring. And apparently he was doing all this crazy stuff like on stage where they would blindfold him, you know, and he would have to play all the solos blindfolded and stuff like that. And he was nailing it. He's also an amazing guitarist.
Sure did,
yeah, great stuff. So definitely, if you want to hear, but you know, the thing that stands these bands apart, I think, from some of the tech death bands is there's plenty of melody there. You know, if you're someone who needs that in your music, and you don't want to just be constantly hit with a wall of pummel and, you know, growling and screaming and, you know, all this sort of end of the spectrum is definitely going to be more appealing to those kind of people. And it's more appealing to me, actually. Another band that's released an amazing album last year that I would recommend to people is this one, Ioten. Access All Worlds. These guys are from Denmark, and you've got on vocals the singer John Aldara, who's from the band Barren Earth. It's kind of like a progressive metal band. Yeah. They're a good band too. Although I mean, I'm not crazy about them, but I do like them. But this album is really beautiful. There's not really too much of the tech stuff in there, but it's really you know, these sort of amazing spacey the music really takes you on this sort of journey. You feel like you're being propelled through space on this cosmic adventure. But then you've got John Aldara, who's another one of these guys, like Michael Ackerfeld was back in the day before his voice sort of got blown out, who can do fantastic death growls, but has this a better voice, I think, than Michael can when he's doing the clean singing. He has this beautiful soaring voice and goes right up there in the upper ranges, but it's glorious when he gets going. So this is definitely another good gateway for people looking for that kind of thing as well.
Cool.
Yeah. You got time for a couple more?
Just a couple, I think.
Okay. I'll do them quickly. Sorry, I know I brought a lot of bands. That was the hard thing about this. When we talked about this, I was like, what are we going to talk about? There's so many bands that
there are so many.
I want to show to people, because I love these bands and I want to see them get some support. So I'll just go through them quickly. This was an album. This was like my album of the year last year, from Fractal Universe, The Impossible Horizon. This is a masterful album. The technical arrangements are all there. The playing is top tier. You've got each one of the members sounding absolutely at the top of the game. You've got the singer doing the same thing with the mix of the clean and growled vocals, and really on this album they've really mastered it. I think their other albums were good up until this point, but this is a masterpiece in my opinion. And to throw in just a little extra icing on the cake, you've got some saxophone in there.
There's nothing wrong with that, right?
It sort of seems like out of place, but there's quite a few of these proggy tech bands that are doing it, and so far I'm loving it. These guys do it really well, and definitely go check out this album. We'll skip ahead now to Burial in the Sky. This is a fantastic album from last year as well, The Consumed Self, from Philadelphia. Very sort of similar to the other stuff we've talked about. You've got the riffing, it's heavy, but you've also got these, there's these moments where it's almost sort of like shoegazy kind of mellow, trancey kind of moments where it's clean singing and stuff, but not boring at all. It's really uplifting and beautiful. It's these bands, they really do a great job of sort of mixing the gross and the heavy with the beautiful and the transcendent. And is that the last one? Oh, one more. Luna's Call. These guys are for fans of Opeth. If you like, Opeth at their most sort of proggy, but you miss the growls, definitely check out this album. Luna's Call is the name of the band, and their album is Void. It's from 2020, I think. And, beautiful progressive metal passages. The songs go all over the place. They take you on these fantastic journeys. They're quite different from all the other bands I've mentioned in that they're much more sort of in that they have a lot more of that old school prog thing as part of what they do. You've got everything from the death metal stuff to Gentle Giant in there, and great clean singing, great growls as well. So yeah. Whew, I think
what's really cool about hearing some of this is there are a handful of artists that you mentioned that I've never listened to. So for me, I got heavily into the whole tech and prog death scene probably like about a decade ago. So, when Spawn of Possession and Decrepit Birth and Brain Drill and Psychroptic and a lot of these bands were just coming out, right? So that was about 10 years ago. So I've listened to some of these groups over the last 5 years, but I've kind of fell out of it a little bit just because of the scope of everything I'm trying to listen to and talk about on the channel and on the webzine. So I've got some cool stuff to listen to, I think, for myself. So
yeah, and I would just say on that point that I think those bands, they all kind of they had their own thing, but they were sort of in this, like there was a specific way of doing things, in intensity, and it was kind of dry and kind of very necrophagisty, like very clean and dry and intense. And that's what you got. And, that's great for what it is. But I think the genre's evolved since then. So I think you're in for a treat with some of these. I think if you check out Inferi, that's a great one to start with, and Persephone and Luna's Call.
Yeah, I'll definitely do that. I mean, it's just kind of cool to kind of look back on this, since its inception. We talked about some of the early bands, and, you had like your Gorgutses and your Suffocations and your Pestilence and Atheist and Death and so on and so forth, and then Necrophagist, and then all these bands that have kind of come and gone over the years. And it's great to see the scene really still thriving, because there are people out there who like the brutality of extreme metal, but they want that sophistication. They want all those progressive elements, and they want the jazz fusion, and they want the exactly right. Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of cool. So for everybody watching, once again, I will reiterate, we're going to put the list of all these bands that Ben has talked about today down in the comments, so you can go and experiment, check them out, see what you think, and come back and let us know. So this has been fun. I want to thank Ben for coming on the show here today. You can check out his reviews on seaoftranquility.org, but we'll hopefully see him back on. We'll try, again, we got lots of oceans and things between us, but we'll try and get him back on the show sometime real soon.
That'd be great.
Thanks to Ben Dudai. Visit us on the web at www.seaoftranquility.org. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. Of course, we are on YouTube. All together, all the damn time.
All the damn time.
That's right. So stay tuned, everybody. We've got coming up this weekend, we've got album homework assignment on Sunday. Tomorrow is the UK Connection with Simon Bray and Stephen Reed. And then, of course, we start everything off back on Monday with the Hudson Valley Squares. So thanks for watching.
Can I just also say, if people want a little bit more extra content, they can also visit me at my channel, The Spotlight Kid on YouTube.
There you go.
If you like, just a small channel, bit of fun.
Cool. Check out Ben on The Spotlight Kid, and hopefully see him back here on CA Tranquility. So for Ben Dudai, I am Pete Pardo. Have a good weekend, everybody. Thanks for watching. See you real soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.